Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So, this evening, it seems like we have a little technical difficulties. However, we will not allow those technical difficulties to continue on those healthcare benefits. So, tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about I'm trying to see if I can get my picture up there. It's just really crazy. But tonight we are talking about pharmacy benefits, right? Right? So there's two parts of pharmacy benefits, formulary and non-formulary, right? So first we're going to talk about what is formulary, okay? So that's what it comes down to. What is formulary? Formulary, ladies and gentlemen, is a list of prescription drugs that's covered by your plan. So essentially, if it's covered by your plan, that is part of the formulary. So let's talk about this in layman's term. What does formulary really mean? So I will use myself for an example, right? My formulary is my medication talks about what hypertension medication that I need to use. Is it formulary or is it non formulary? Well, it's a regular formulary generic, okay? So let's talk about what is non formulary. It is a drug that's included on an insurance plan, but is not fully covered. We're going to pause right there. Before we go any further, I'm having some technical difficulties, but it's okay. Is a drug included in an insurance plan preferred, hence fully covered? And that's where the non formulary, ladies and gentlemen, becomes a technical part of the formulary, right? Okay, so when we look at it and we say, is this covered on my plan? Yes or no? So the question becomes, ladies and gentlemen, is it on your formulary? Is it not on your formulary? So it becomes tricky. So let's look at the next one. Oh, wait a minute. Dispense as written. This is when it gets good. Because now, ladies and gentlemen, we have two parts. We have a part that's formulary, and we have a part that's non-formulary. So the question becomes is, what does a do not substitute mean? Okay. So, hi, Washina and Matasha. Thanks for joining this afternoon. Dispense as written, do not substitute. So we're going to pause here for a moment, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm not sure why my screen is not showing myself, but we're going to pause here for a moment. Dispense as written. And please, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to put your questions in the chat or however you want to display your questions in the chat. Okay. So, dispense as written. This is where it gets tricky because a lot of people do not understand when a physician writes a prescription, he has the option to dispense as written. What is the definition of dispense as written? That means, ladies and gentlemen, no generic, none whatsoever, none generic. That means dispense as written means write or dispense the medication that I, that I was be able to write the prescriptions for do not substitute. What I want to make sure everyone understands, do not substitute means. Hi, Juliet. And I want to make sure everyone understands this. Do not substitute or dispense as written means we don't want any generics, right? Matt Dodge, my friend Matt Dodge, who's on here with us this evening, he is a pharmacy guru. So what happens is do not substitute. That means there are certain medications, ladies and gentlemen, regardless to how you take the medication, the generic will never take the place of the name brand medication, because we all understand the name brand medication does have some, what's the words I want to say? It does have some components that are not quite potent as the actual name brand. Okay. So we have here in the chat, Matasha say, if you want a bank, if you want a specific brand, but insurance company won't pay because there is a generic, it has to happen. So what she's saying is there are instances, ladies and gentlemen, when you want to get a brand name. However, your insurance company is saying there is a generic mandate, which means it does not matter that your physician wrote do not substitute. There is a generic mandate, meaning unless there is a reason, specific reason medically why you cannot get that generic, then we're going to present that generic, right? Okay. So that's formulary. Dispense as written. So let's use an example. My medication, my hypertension medication is amlodipine, but my primary care physician did not, I don't know why my camera is not working, ladies and gentlemen. My physician did not write my amlodipine to dispense as written because my physician did not write it as such. That means they can give me a generic. And I'm going to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. If I go back and I get my amlodipine, which is a high blood pressure medication, and I look at it, I probably do have a generic. But because I'm human and most people are human, we never even take 2 steps to stop and look and see if it's a generic or not. Okay? But that is the basic part, ladies and gentlemen, of just a generic formulary. So when I have my generic formulary, ladies and gentlemen, do I dispense as written? And if so, that means I do not substitute. If I have my standard formulary and the provider, the physician, does not, stay with me, ladies and gentlemen, and the physician does not, do not substitute, that means the physician can, the pharmacy, my apologies, the pharmacy and will give you a generic product. Okay? Stay with me. Now, what does non-formulary means? Because we have 2 parts. Formulary, meaning that it's covered by your insurance carrier. Non-formulary is a drug that's not included in your insurance plan preferred list of medications. So what I need everybody to understand is that if it's a non-formulary, there's a great likelihood that you will, in most cases, pay a greater percent of a percentage of increase. So, what we need to talk about is a specific example. So, as always, I'm not sure what's going on with my camera, but as always, I will use myself as an example, right? So today I take amlodipine, okay? Amlodipine is on their formulary. It's a generic mandate, which means when I get amlodipine, I'm going to get a generic because that is the insurance requirement for that particular medication. Okay. So, what is considered non formulary? That's when it gets crucial. It's a drug that's not included in the insurance preferred. Hence, it's not fully covered. Okay. So I have one young lady who says she can't hear me, which that is so funny. So I'll turn up my volume. So now, when we look at the non-formulary, so we see on the website or in the internet, Bertha, can you hear me now? When we look out on the internet, we look at all of these diabetic drugs, and the diabetic drugs truly, truly, ladies and gentlemen, is formulary if you are truly a diabetic. Okay, we're going to pause there. There are several drugs, and I am not going to get into the names of those different drugs only because there's a plethora, many of them, that talks about they're supposed to supplement or relieve your diabetes issues. However, because most diabetic medication has an impact on has an impact on your cravings or eating or those different kinds of things. When you look at those diabetes medications, they're pretty much going to curb your appetite, right? But those drugs, when we look at them, you say, well, why aren't they formulary? The most reasons drugs aren't formulary is because they have not been approved by the FDA, right? And so when you say, well, what do you mean not approved by the FDA? The FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, has a particular source or program or status that they do team. So work with me, ladies and gentlemen. Excuse me. If you provide that information to the FDA, then at that point, you will the FDA makes a determination whether or not. So we have a nurse in here. Thanks, Crystal, our board president. And what she's saying is a provider writes a dispense as written, but the insurance has a generic mandate which overrides the other. So very good question. Thank you, Crystal. Remember this: dispense as written always overrides the generic mandate. Why? Because, thank you, Matt Dodge, it depends. But in most cases, the dispense as written is going to override, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt Dodge, it's going to override because the generic may or may not include all of the components that the brand name has, right? And so I'm going to read Matt Dodge comments. If the generic is not rated the exact same as the brand name in most instances, and thank you, Matt Dodge, because what he did was he confirmed what I was saying, right, team, ladies and gentlemen, that if that generic is not equal, there's not an option, right, Matt? Right, Matt? There's not an option. If that generic is not 100% equal to that brand name, then if the physicians write dispense as written, and ladies and gentlemen, the next time you go to your physicians and you get an actual prescription, a hard copy of a prescription, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to look at the bottom. I can't remember if it's the left hand or the right hand corner. But what I want you to do, ladies and gentlemen, is I want you to look at the bottom of that medication prescription. And there's going to be a box on there that says dispense as written. If, and Matt Dodge confirmed this for me, and you all want to know who Matt Dodge is, that's my good old buddy, my pharmacist friend, and Catherine, who is the board director of Community Health Partners. You know, we're all working together to help everyone. If and only if that box dispense as written is not checked, then the pharmacy will dispense a generic medication. True or false, Matt Dodge? True or false, Catherine Rosengren? If the provider of services does not check. So what I want you to understand is there's two components here, ladies and gentlemen. When you go to the physician's office or whether or not you go to the emergency room, what will happen is the physician at that point will submit your medications electronically, right? And because they submit it electronically, you do not know whether or not they're submitting dispense as written, which means it is regardless is with formulary or non-formulary, right? The fact that it's dispensed as written, they have to give you the brand name of that, right? So Matasha's asking if they stop offering the pharmacy cards that assist with payments for the prescriptions, what would be the safe to infer, the brand name or generic? So it really depends on the medication, Matasha. That's a very good question. So if they just completely remove the pharmacy card, so you know the one where they have the commercial, very good question, commercial, where they have the commercial with those, what's that, those Sheen guys in it, where they're showing is it the medication or the formulary, you know, those commercials with the formulary curses on it. So what happens is if we take those away, what would happen, right? And according to Matt Dodge, who's our pharmacy specialist, it's true. Pharmacy will always substitute a generic unless otherwise specified, dispense as written. So what I want you to understand, ladies and gentlemen, there's two parts to this. Part A, you will get a prescription, but if they're sending that prescription electronically, Matt, you know, confirm for me for this. If they're submitting that prescription electronically, unless there is a medical reason that the generic will not work. What reason will the generic not work? When that is the situation, then it becomes a dispense as written. So our clinical people who are out here watching and in Facebook land, let's talk about this. What reasons will it not work? Right? Okay. So if we think about it, what is formulary versus what is not formulary? And that's where a lot of people get confused because the first thing they want to say is, well, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, my pharmacy, they gave me this drug and they gave me generic. Well, the reason why they gave you the generic, ladies and gentlemen, is because your physician did not check the box, dispense as written. And ladies and gentlemen, because your physician did not check that box, they're going to go ahead on and give you a generic. Period. End of sentence. I take I shouldn't say tons. I take several medications, and all of my medications, ladies and gentlemen, are generic. Why? Because my physician did not check that box. Now, I know everybody out here is saying, what box is she talking about? So let's talk about that box, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, what I want you to understand is there's a prescription, and your prescription can be sent to the pharmacy one of two ways. And Matt Dodge, jump in here if I'm going sideways, right? Your physician can be sent to the pharmacy electronically, or option B, team, is you can physically take a hard copy of that prescription to your pharmacy. Okay? Now, what I want you to understand, either way, there is still that little box on that medication, dispense as written. And what I want most people to understand about your benefits, when your physician checks that box, ladies and gentlemen, dispense as written, that is a medical decision that has been confirmed by a medical provider that a generic will not suffice in this case. In this case, you must have the brand name, because there are some things that the generic does not have. So, for example, if your brand name has A, B, C, E, D, F, and G, however, your generic has A, B, C, D, E, F, and F, but it doesn't include that G. What that means, ladies and gentlemen, there's some point that medication may not have its full efficacy because it did not include that last component, right? And Matt Dodge, our pharmacy guy, he's saying true. Pharmacy will always substitute the generic unless, ladies and gentlemen, that particular box is checked, dispense as written, right? And what I want everybody to understand is there are several medical conditions that generic works fine for. Can we all agree on that? We all can agree on that. There are several medications that generic will work fine for. However, on the flip side of that, ladies and gentlemen, there are certain medications that generic just not gonna do. So, thanks for Matt. And Matt says some generic drugs are marketed only as a component of the compatible with a specific brand drug. It's called the AB rating system with medication, which means it's the average brand. So while you think you're getting the brand name, at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, and Matt, thank you, Matt Dodge, for confirming that for us. At the end of the day, if the physician does not check that box, dispense as written, you will be getting a generic brand of medication, because that formulary, right? And for those who joined us late, you're trying to decide, okay, so Melissa, what do you mean formulary? What do you mean formulary? So, excuse me. Hey, Washina. So, Washina, what we're talking about, and we're talking about formularies, right? What is formularies? Formularies are the medications that's covered by your insurance carrier. I don't care if you have commercial insurance, a Medicare, a Medicaid plan, a Medicare HMO plan. Why we're specific for HMOs? Because we know, ladies and gentlemen, Medicare does not cover medication. So we're specifically talking about those Medicare HMO plans, right? If it is on their formulary, 99.9% of the time, they're going with a generic mandate. It has nothing to do with you. In most cases, the generic is just as good as the brand name. There are instances when you go to the grocery store, right? And versus buying Aleve, you go to Dollar General or Family Dollar, somewhere like that, and you buy a generic brand of Aleve, right? Some type of ibuprofen, okay? Because we know Aleve is an ibuprofen. But when you go in the store and you say, wow, let me get this generic ibuprofen, that equals getting a generic prescription written by your physician. Make sense? Let me connect the dots for you because we only have 3 more minutes left and I'm almost over my time and I want everybody to understand. Formulary means, plain and simple, it is on your insurance plan, with the exception of Medicare, because we understand the why behind the why. Medicare does not cover medications. When it's on formulary and it's a Medicare plan, that becomes a Medicare Part C plan, right? It's just a list of covered, right? So you have 2 parts, formulary and non-formulary. Non-formulary means it's not covered, right? Or ladies and gentlemen, if it is covered, it's covered at a reduced rate. So, because fortunately, thank God for Jesus, I have not fallen into that category. All of my medications have fallen into the formulary with a generic mandate, which means I'm getting my amlodipine, I'm getting my other medication that I take in the morning with my amlodipine, I'm getting all of those generic. I would know the difference, right? Only because I'm not a pharmacist. But there are people who do know the difference between the generic and the non generic. But I'm going to deal with that. And then on the flip side, you have that third component, which focuses on dispense as written, do not substitute. Ladies and gentlemen, this is when it gets critical. This is going to be isolated to specifically talking about conditions. Okay? That's when it gets tricky. Dispense as written, do not substitute. Stay with me. Stay with me, if you will, for a moment. I have hypertension. I am perfectly fine with getting a generic medication for hypertension. But what I want to ask you is it okay to get a generic medication maybe for a lack of a better example, ladies and gentlemen, a cancer diagnosis, right? There are certain diagnoses, and there are a plethora of them. I cannot give you all of them off the top of my head, but what I need you to understand is now dispense as written. So, ladies and gentlemen, and Juliet, thank you, because I really want to make sure everybody understands this. When you take your prescription to the pharmacy, if and only if That box at the bottom is checked, dispense as written. You will 99.9% of the time, and I won't want to say 100% of the time, and Matt, quote me if I'm wrong, unless that box is checked, they will give you a generic. If I went in the back right now and look at my medications, and I want all of you who take medications right now, just pause for a minute, right? Just pause for a minute and go and look at your medication bottles and notice when you look at the names of those medications, ladies and gentlemen, that will not be brand name medications. Those generally are generics unless you truly, truly have a medical condition that the generic will not work, right? So, I'm at the top of the hour. Before we go, I want everybody to understand if you get a generic medication, it's okay. You're going to survive. That's the first thing I want everybody to understand. Agreed, Matt? Matt, you agree? If you get a generic medication, you're going to survive, right? Unless you have some type of significant, crucial illness. I'm okay taking my amlodipine generic. I'm okay taking my yep, Matt Dodge said he take all the generics. Look at your bottles, Juliet, Washina, everybody, go and look at your bottles. You all will be truly surprised at the generic medications that we all are receiving. And they all work fine because even my psychotropics. So everybody want to talk about psychotropics. Psychotropic are those mental health. I know my camera's not working, but I'm touching my head. Those psychotropic medications that we need to take to keep us in place. You even get those as generics, right? So I tell you, my psychotropic and my whole family, because there are several of us in my family, we do have some tendencies to just get out of the box. But the psychotropics keep us in place, right? Thanks, Washina. So Washina has, from what I pay, I'm sure there are generic, right? You can't now. Well, Washina, that's a trick. That's a trick. Because the way it works is in most instances, generic is always lower than the brand name. That's a given. However, depending on the type, and that's where we need to make sure we understand, Washina, depending on the type that we are receiving, that will dictate whether or not or the cost of that copay. Because to Washina's point, let me get over here to Washina's point. She's saying they are all generic, but there are some drugs, ladies and gentlemen, even though they are a brand name, because that brand name is common across the board, the copay may be lower. However, but Washina brings up a good point. Generic copay, 99.99% of the time, generic copay is going to be lower, right? Matt Dodge is sharing with us a patient has the right to request a brand name. However, the pharmacy is required to submit that claim to your insurance company saying the patient requested the brand name, not the physician. I'm going to pause there. And Washina, I'm going to punt Matt's statement back to you and Juliet. Okay? So what Matt is saying is right. the physician did not check that box that says dispense as written, which means which means the physician is saying this patient cannot have the generic. They should only have the brand name, right? But what Matt Dodge is saying, and for those of you who all don't know Matt Dodge is my little pharmacy friend who's a certified pharmacy tech and all those good credentials, because y'all know I'm not going to call a name unless they know what they're talking about. And Matt Dodge is sharing with us, and Crystal, are you still there? Crystal down in Wisconsin? The patient has a right to request a brand name. Understand this, ladies and gentlemen. It's the game that they play. By default, when your medication prescription is filled, by default, they give everybody the generic, period, end of sentence. There's only 2 instances when they will not give the generic. When the physician checks that box, dispense as written, or if the patient requests to have the brand name. And at the end of this conversation, yes, ladies and gentlemen, you can request the brand name. And if and when the pharmacy fills that prescription with the brand name, you will have to pay the difference. Does that make sense, Juliet and Washina? Because when you were getting the generic, you'd had to pay a copay, right? But what I also want you to understand, if you get a brand name, understand your copay should, in most cases, be higher, right? And Washina is saying her doctor changed her medication because her insurance could not cover the brand name at the cost she was willing to pay monthly. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, those monthly costs. So because her insurance company would not cover the brand name, Washina, and everybody remember Washina who used to go to Golden Gate. Juliet, you remember Washina with the pretty girl. She had those 3 pretty young ladies. What she's saying is that her insurance company is saying no. They would not cover the brand name, but she had to pay the difference. So how do we do that? Then what happens is the insurance company is saying, ladies and gentlemen, is her condition really that crucial that the generic will not suffice? Because of her medical condition, she has to make sure that the brand name does what it needs to do. And on that note, I'm going to tell y'all, thank God for favor in Jesus. I do not have any issues right now because I'm good with generic. And Washina, you give me a call because I'm going to need to talk to your doctor to see how we can get that covered. And I want everybody to join me next week. And guess what we're going to be talking about? Eye benefits in all of my Zuli, so I can tell you how to get all of your eyeglasses and all of that stuff covered. But in the meantime and in between time, if you have any pharmacy questions, send them to me at information.communityhealthpartners.org. In the meantime and in between time, I'll see you next week when we will be talking about eye benefits. And remember this, ladies and gentlemen, why have benefits if you're not going to use them? I'll talk to you all next week. Bye.